like to welcome all the guests and speakers and donors of the regional PULSAR program. My name is Iwona Warzecha. I'm Senior Financial Management Specialist working for the WorldBank Global Practice in Europe and Central Asia. And I would like to invite you to the dissemination of our new product under component of the PULSAR program, which is the paper on benefits of accrual accounting in the public sector, which was prepared by academics from CIGAR network, which stands for Comparative International Government Accounting Research. So these are the teams from various universities in Europe, with contribution of our panelists invited today for the dissemination event, and under guidance received from our PULSAR Technical Advisory Board. The paper presents a variety of benefits of accrual accounting, but also costs related to the implementation of accrual reforms, which can be useful source of information both at the preparation of the reforms, but also during the implementation when the benefits of the reform should start to materialize. The main objective of the webinar is to present key findings and messages from the papers, share country experience on the main benefits of accrual accounting from Cyprus and Greece, and discuss what are the key implications for PULSAR community, how PULSAR beneficiary countries can better harness such benefits to lead accounting reforms. I would like to now give the floor to Dan Boyce, our governance practice manager from the World Bank, for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Iwona, and welcome everyone. This paper is a product of the PULSAR program. Most of you are involved in it. It's a regional and country level program of 13 countries in Europe and Central Asia that's implemented with financial support from the governments of Austria and Switzerland. It's one of actually several studies produced under PULSAR in the last 2 years, aimed to help the countries implement accrual accounting, including one on the drivers of reform that Iwona took the lead on also, and focused on kind of what can get countries, what are the main incentives for countries and government officials to move ahead on accrual accounting reform. There's also a paper, but also a whole new tool called Pulse that's being rolled out now with the support of a detailed guidance tool. And so we continue to support accrual accounting implementation through PULSAR in all these types of ways. Still, cash accounting is widely used by the public sectors, including in the PULSAR countries, but like most of the world, these countries are gradually moving towards accruals. We know that accrual accounting statements provide a more comprehensive view of financial performance and the financial position of an entity or government, and with information that really couldn't be tracked under cash accounting. Equally important, I think, is that accrual accounting involves a longer-term mindset that is important for accountants, but also for government and public sector management. Mindset that the effects of the government financial transactions go beyond their immediate budgetary impact, which is tends to be the focus under cash accounting. So this paper presents the benefits of accrual accounting for both the internal and external users, focusing on things like decision-making, accountability, and transparency. Transparency has a special role given that it's a benefit or an outcome that especially impacts the external users. But of course, is also a good impact on internal government users. However, in order for these advantages to materialize, there's some costs and some investments. and stakeholders have to be able to ultimately gain access to the reliable accounting, financial reporting information, and that has to be disclosed in an understandable language and be widely accessible. So this report draws on the available literature from the reform experiences, especially of Cyprus, France, Greece, Portugal, and the United Kingdom. And based on that, offers important suggestions and lessons learned for reform in the PULSAR countries. The interviews with experts who have actively participated in the adoption of accrual accounting provided valuable insight into the perceived advantages and benefits of reform, and at the same time, the difficulties and types of resistance that's encountered in these changes. The report highlights that each country can have a different accounting maturity level, which can then also influence that calculation of the cost and the benefits. In terms of the cost, implementation of accrual accounting usually has quite a large investment cost at the beginning, or beginning years, I should say. First, in terms of time, there's a annual cost and overall cost in terms of the time required, especially from the government finance officials who have to make changes. There's also just a cost in terms of budget flows and accrued costs, which might include major investments in systems and software and consulting support. And then from the government's own funds, some costs in terms of financial sources and possibly donor or other sources of funding that might be obtained for this investment. However, although these initial costs can be significant, it can be also something that's offset, usually more than offset with the longer term outcome of sounder management of resources and the financial benefits of reductions in the cost of delivering services and performing public sector activities. Once this much improved source of information is available to government officials and to legislators and the broader public. So this paper makes clear that the reform of the accounting system needs to be placed in the context of a broader PFM reform, which would be similar to accrual accounting, be aimed at increasing accountability and performance of public management. And there's also significant investments in human resources, in addition to the information technology. And above all, the high-level political support is required for the whole process. And all of these are probably the main key resources in order to produce a stable change. And the investments in human resources are not only some initial investment as the accrual accounting gets rolled out, but ongoing training for the implementation of the new approach as implementation continues for several years. The compilation of high quality, reliable information under accrual accounting is not an end in itself, and the full potential benefits of the reform can only be realized if the information is concretely used by politicians and managers in the decision-making process and made widely available to the public and other stakeholders to improve transparency and accountability. I think we focused a lot on accrual accounting in most of the time up till now on just the internal dynamics of applying IPSAs and new standards and getting countries ready to produce the financial reports. And I think it's a more recent experience that we're realizing that this availability and use of the information is now the priority, because it's one thing to produce a lot of information in a new way, but really the value of it only comes when government officials especially are using this information, but then also other users also as well are taking it and applying it in how they make decisions. So I thank all of you for joining us, especially the speakers. And now I go back to Ivana, and we'll start with the main sessions of today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for these very interesting remarks. And now I would like to welcome academics from CIGAR network to present the findings and key messages from the paper. And the team comprises Eugenio Caperchione, Sandra Cohen, Francesca Manes Rossi, Isabel Brusca. Eugenio, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ivona, for this. And good afternoon. Okay, Francesca, thank you. We can leave maybe just the first slide. Okay, as you read our names in this well-designed slide of presentation, and I'm Eugenio Caperchione. I live and work in Italy. I'm a professor in public sector accounting. I am one of the authors of this paper, and I acted as a liaison officer with the PULSAR team. So let me start then by thanking, on behalf of all the authors, the PULSAR team for accepting our proposal, and more than that, for their really highly qualified professional support throughout the process. So it has required some months, but we have appreciated the quality of the intervention and the suggestions. I must also say thank you to a group of external experts. They are highly qualified professionals. Most of them, I mean, they are somehow linked to our networks, the CIGAR network, the Permanent Study Group 12 of EGPA, European Group for Public Administration. And these people accepted to discuss with us about the issues on the table. And two of these individuals are here today, Mr. Payuras and Mr. Ajijamianu. So really thanks to them for their generous support. But most importantly, I want to welcome the audience today, because I want to be frank, we tried to have you, the audience, in mind when we were writing, and we also hope to make this seminar useful for you today. This is why there will be time for us to speak, but there will surely be time for you in the audience to raise your hand, raise questions, and try to start some discussion. Now, having said this, well, I've welcomed the people, I've said thank you. Now I want to introduce the paper. This will be quite short. I will introduce the paper, its structure, its findings, and then I will leave the word to my colleagues. So I will not use the slides, maybe only this one. Thank you. But then my colleagues will go in deeper details into the contents of the paper. So short history, 1 year ago, the PULSAR program invited interested parties to apply to prepare a knowledge paper focused on the benefits of accrual accounting in the public sector. And so we applied because the issue of the benefits of accrual is relevant and timely. I can say that reforms have been implemented in many countries. There are, as you all know, national, international standards. But despite all the efforts, some jurisdictions still prefer budgeting and reporting with cash. As Dr. Boyce told us, there are countries also in this group, in this room, who still use cash. And other countries introduce accrual but are unsure about the benefits of accrual. And there is also uncertainty as to the costs related of accrual. So this issue also needs a further reflection. And finally, an important reflection, an important point concerns the use of accounting information. In our academic networks, we have studied for years the usefulness of the better information which we get with accrual, but the usefulness is only potential. Then we also need use. So we decided to write this paper, and we had different aspects to consider. And here I'm also a bit introducing the structure, because on one side, we wanted, of course, collect evidence of the benefits provided by the accrual accounting reforms. Our title is on the benefits. So are there benefits? Do we have institutions which have improved their performance because of the introduction of accrual accounting? Of course, it is not easy to isolate the contribution of accrual to the improvement of the performance, but there is some evidence. We have gathered it also through the interviews, and we reported some examples of benefits in our paper. On the other side, we believed it necessary to investigate and to detail the conditions to be respected in order, one, to successfully implement the reform, so that you have everything in place, and two, to transform the potential benefits into reality. And this will be in section 5 of the paper. And finally, as you can imagine, we decided to deal with costs, because top managers, politicians, decision makers, like people in this room, you don't want to go for accrual unless you are sure that the benefits of accrual overcome its costs. This is reasonable. I sympathize with this. So the issue deserved consideration, and you will read a lot of things in the section 6. So this was our program and the findings, just a short list of the findings. And you will find the findings in the executive summary and then throughout the paper. A first finding, number 1, I just pick up some of them. Number 1, the accrual accounting statements provide a more comprehensive view of the financial performance and position of an entity. And these accrual statements provide us with information which is not available with cash accounting. This seems obvious, but this is rather important. So we can confirm there are pieces of information which you can only have with accrual. Great. Second, and really important, if we list the benefits of accrual accounting, and my colleague Francesca Manes Rossi will do it just in a couple of minutes. We looked to the internal users, the external users. We looked to decision-making and accountability, so different profiles. And we read the literature. Of course, we already read and also wrote the literature in many cases. We spoke with the people of the expert countries. We thought of what can be of interest to the PULSAR countries. And at the end of the day, we have a rather large list of benefits which can be useful, we believe, for you. By the way, there will also be a poll later on, and we will sort of discuss with you, ask you, the audience, to tell you what you think. Then we discuss and we have findings about transparency, and Isabel Brusca will deal with this issue. I don't want to use too much time. Finally, we move to the enabling conditions to successfully introduce accrual accounting. And here Sandra Cohen will discuss about goal setting and processes, human capital, technical tools. And she will also discuss and present our findings as to the costs of the reforms. And as Dr. Boyce told us, the costs must be then weighted against the benefits. This is rather complicated, but this also offers promising information on the fact, promising evidence that the benefits absolutely can overcome the costs. And then I have a final consideration. So when you listen to us today and the audience, you will read our paper tomorrow, what's the next step? And the next step inevitably requires a decision. I mean, I'm maybe running too fast, but this paper, this seminar, the whole story is only meant to offer to the people in the room an opportunity to reflect, to discuss, and to possibly to take a decision to try to implement accrual accounting. Of course, I mean, this can only be done by people who have a responsibility. Of course, a reform of this magnitude requires resources, commitment, the willingness to overcome barriers, resistance. But as you will read, so I encourage everybody to read, there are success stories, good examples. So I am sure, and the whole team, we are sure that you can go along this way with confidence. But of course, this is a quite engaging journey. So you have to equip yourself to be prepared and to maybe also to continue to study and to manage carefully. So this was just to introduce the paper. Now I think that Francesca can continue with the presentation, and then we will collect questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenio, for your introduction. My name is Francesca Manes Rossi. I work in the University of Naples, and I'm here to present you the benefits of accrual accounting. As you know, in most of the public sector organizations around the world, cash accounting has dominated the scene for a long time, mainly because it is simple. It is based on the recognition of cash inflows and cash outflows, and therefore expenses and revenues are recognized when the payment is made or received. However, you know also that its simplicity is a limitation because it does not account for the costs consumed and revenues earned over a given period, regardless of the existence of cash flow, and consequently is not fully appropriate for assessing the overall income created by an entity. That's why we are trying to focus our attention on the benefits of accrual accounting. We are here to contribute to the PULSAR project. PULSAR objective is to support the enhancement of public sector accounting and financial reporting frameworks in line with international standards and good practices to improve governance, accountability, transparency, performance. So that's why we start discussing the benefits. However, as Eugenio already mentioned, we do not ignore the hardness and cost that have created resistance in some countries, both in Europe and in other continents. But we have also to consider that many encouragement has been provided by international organizations, standard setters, international donors, requiring public sector organization to move towards accrual accounting. And also some experiences gained in many countries, especially for reporting purposes, have demonstrated some of the benefits that we are going to show you. In this view, the first step is to focus on the expected or experiences benefits. Our discussion make reference to general accrual accounting concepts and principles rather than to a specific set of standards, because we are conscious that each country can set its own national principles. However, we cannot deny that the international public sector accounting standards are used as a common reference point. And many countries already chosen to adopt directly or use them as a basis in order to develop their national standards. It is also important to underline, by our perspective, that public sector accounting reform are generally part of a broader modernization of public financial management. It means that to exploit all its benefit, accrual accounting needs to be part of a large process to modernize public administration. Let me go back to one sentence that Mr. Boyce said in his presentation. The information is not an end in itself. This is a very important message to keep in mind. Too often, the focus is put on obtaining the information rather than on how is then used, considering it as the final aims of the process rather than only the first step. If we want to exploit which are the benefits of accrual accounting, we need to answer two very simple questions. Benefit for what? And the answer can be for accountability and for decision making. And for whom? We can say that we have to consider the benefits toward external and internal users. So let's start with some benefits for external users. In accordance with the conceptual framework issued by the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, the objectives of financial reporting by public sector entities are to provide information about the entity that is useful to users for accountability purposes and for decision-making purposes. In the approach followed by the IPSAS-B, the citizens are the primary users in their double role, because from one side, they are service recipients and resource providers as taxpayers. So they need to obtain information in order to consider how public resources that have been collected by public administration have been managed. Of course, there are also other external users, as you can see, not only citizens and their representatives, but also companies and non-governmental organizations, donors, lenders and creditors, rating agency, and so on and so forth. We will discuss some of the expected and experienced benefits, looking both at accountability and decision-making. Let's start first with accountability. And let's try to make a connection with the categories of users and accountability benefits. For sure, citizens having accrual accounting can obtain better information on how the resources have been used. While cash accounting provide information only on the cash flow, accrual accounting tell us how the resources have been consumed in a certain period. And also, again, looking at citizens. In a democracy, citizens need to scrutinize what politicians and public managers do with public resources. Furthermore, if we consider the perspective of lenders, rating agency, international organization, accrual accounting may allow to see how resources are spent and then can help in reducing corruption, which is a problem that affects several European countries, but also outside from Europe. In a decision-making perspective, going back again to citizens, we can say that in a democracy, citizens can take the electoral decisions on the basis of accounting information that they can obtain from different governmental tiers. Also, it is important for lenders and creditors because on the basis of accrual information, they can decide if it is the case or not to lend financial resources. And if we look at non-governmental organizations or companies that might be providers of public services, they need to consider how the entity, the public entity, is managing public resources in order to consider if it is worth to create a partnership with the public entity. So accrual accounting can incentivize public-private partnership. And looking at regulatory and oversight bodies and also audit institution, accrual accounting help in better monitoring financial and fiscal sustainability. We said that apart for external users, the conceptual framework prepared by the IPSAS-B consider also internal users. And we can consider in particular some of the listed benefits for internal users. First of all, let's list who are the internal users. Accountants, of course, people that are in charge for internal control and internal audit, managers, governing bodies and politicians, but also if look broadly to the public administration in general, we can also consider fiscal statisticians and macroeconomists. In this case, let me start from the decision-making benefits. Looking at all the list of internal users, accrual accounting allowed to have a better analysis and focus on the performance and achieving values for money decision-making. Also, it provides information that can be useful for budgeting and planning processes. A further benefit is related to the ability of accrual accounting to support long-term thinking and decision-making, because accrual allowed to consider how much resources need to be spent for a certain services in a certain period, and thus allowed to take decisions considering also long-term effect. A further benefit is that it allows to have a sound management of assets. This is an aspect that is totally impossible to obtain with the cash accounting. And last but not least, a very important point, if we want to consider young people, a further decision-making benefits is in terms of intergenerational equity decisions. If we are able to consider the long-term effect of the decisions, we can provide better decision for the future generation. Through the interview that we had with some of our champions, we have prepared a list of practical insight. First of all, allowed me to repeat what Bernard Schatz, one of the champions that we interviewed, states. He said, the benefits of accrual accounting come with the use. And we strongly believe in this sentence, because the more public officials, governments use accrual accounting, the more they can obtain benefits, both for decision-making and for accountability. Let's have a look, considering the experience already had in some European countries. First of all, accrual accounting can bring accurate, reliable, timely, and complete information on assets and liabilities in public sector entities. Non-cash transactions are recorded and recognized for the first time, and this is a big difference towards cash accounting. Furthermore, as we already mentioned, accrual is an enabler for improvements in financial management, permitting disciplined management and rigorous follow-up, as well as accountability. And we know that accountability allowed to have a better engagement with citizens. It is the prerequisite for citizens' engagement in public decision-making. Accrual also fosters better allocation and use of public resources, especially long-term assets for better service provision, and overall it allowed to improve assets management, considering which are the costs for maintenance, for instance, or for replacement of assets. Furthermore, accrual accounting improves reporting, as there are checks and balances. And of course, as my colleagues will explain better, improving the reporting function may also allow the public sector organization to prepare reporting that are more simple, some kind of reports that might improve the dialogue with the citizens. Thanks to accrual accounting, supervising and oversight authorities will have better information to perform more effective and target control and audit. And accrual accounting allows for foreseeing long-term effect, as I already mentioned before, connected to plans, activities, the anticipation of risk. These are tangible benefits that the people we interview have underlined, presenting the economic substance of the transaction as well as the effect of the different options, allowed to foresee the long-term effect, and also allowed politicians to reflect on this long-term effect and on intergenerational equity. Risk coming from financial instruments, contingent liabilities, foreign currency, climate change, public-private partnership can be recognized and disclosed. This is a further benefit against cash accounting system that do not allow to recognize risk. And also it allowed to disclose this risk, impairment of financial assets, for instance, receivable, and assessment of the cost of financial strategy with the use of financial instruments becomes evident. As I said several times, it promotes intergenerational equity as it allows better understanding of how the public sector should be organized. For example, Loans for the creation of assets should not be extended beyond the life of the assets themselves. Also, and this is a benefit that has been underlined from the internal point of view, accrual accounting provides better information on costs that managers have to face in order to ensure high quality public services. Also, IT facilitates the production of more reliable national accounting data, also for the purpose of fiscal statistics. Accrual make it easier to communicate improvements in the administration of financial affairs in the Eurostat and European Union, and to be compliant with the European regulation and the fiscal rules. Of course, we have to keep in mind that accrual benefits are different for different users. The emphasis put on the information disclosed in the statements depends on the role and the responsibility of the users, the types of information sought, as well as on the circumstance. If we go with our mind to the recent period of the pandemic with the COVID-19, or even back to the financial crisis, we know that this kind of challenge requires specific information, and accrual accounting may serve for this scope. So the benefits definitely depend on the perspective of the users. Now I leave the floor to Isabel, that will introduce about the relationship between accrual accounting and transparency.
Thank you, Francesca, for your presentation and for your introduction. I'm Isabel Brusca from the University of Zaragoza, and I'm going to explain our results about accrual accounting and transparency. We have seen that an important advantage of accrual accounting-based systems is that they allow the elaboration of complete information that can be useful for accountability purposes. This can be especially relevant actually, where changes in our society and the increasing role assigned to citizens as co-producers of public services call for new accountability requirements. Really, the use of accrual accounting systems is necessary in order to calculate the cost of delivering government programs, services, and so on. And it allows citizens and other external stakeholders to assess whether efficiency requirements have been achieved and whether the entity can meet in short and long-term financial obligations, as before Francesca explained in detail. On the slide, we can see some possible issues to be aware of with greater transparency, what we have called in the paper transparency considerations, which include, first, each entity has to find the right trade-off between transparency and the cost of providing information, as well as a balance between releasing useful information and causing an information overload. It's important to avoid information overload, which might have some counterproductive effects, such as to focus on non-relevant data or to include too much internal and technical information that may discourage further reading. This dilemma, however, is not public sector specific. The private sector faces similar challenges to reduce excessive and irrelevant boilerplate financial information and disclosures, which distracts users from understanding significant and value-relevant accounting information. Furthermore, it can encourage opportunist behavior by managers and politicians. For instance, managers can selectively use or manage performance indicators to claim higher salaries, bonuses, or to obtain larger budgets. Government opponents, on the other side, can also use information to criticize or to influence public opinion, but focusing on sensitive topics. These issues can only be tackled with education and awareness rising amongst various users of accrual accounting information. To this end, it's important to identify how information should be disclosed and how much information should be provided. This transparency dilemma requires that public entities design their information systems and the reports that can be produced from them to ensure that each category of stakeholders can access to information that is relevant to them. There are also some requirements that the information must have in order to achieve transparency conditions, which can be seen on the slide, such as accessibility, reliability, timely, clear, understandable, focus on user information. So it becomes necessary to use communication tools that fit the information needs of all interested parties and channels of communication able to ensure that relevant information reaches the right groups of stakeholders. In the end, this is in line with the qualitative characteristics of financial reporting defined by the main international accounting standard setters, and in particular by the IPSASB. If we move to the results that we have seen in the interviews carried out with experts from countries, it evidences some practical insights about the accrual accounting and transparency. First, financial reports need to be simplified, to be more popular, and to be effectively communicated to citizens. In this way, the information will become useful for them and they will be persuaded about the necessity of the reform. It needs dialogue with the stakeholders, education, consultation, so to introduce also or to take into account also stakeholders in the discussion. The more informed the citizen, the better for equity and justice in the country. The citizens become more responsible, and in this way, they care about the future and the intergenerational equity. At the same time, they can hold government accountable for its actions. The press, the mass media can play an intermediary role to translate and interpret the accounting number for citizens, but they need to become also experts to use the information. As we said before, the experts call attention also to the necessary avoid overlaps of information. So accountants have to exercise some judgment. Not everybody needs to know all the details. Public scrutiny should concentrate only on the issues that matter or that can be more useful for each stakeholder. Standard reporting and financial statements should be visualized and made easily accessible on websites and with other channels, as we before mentioned. Full disclosure is especially challenging when liabilities exceed access. That is the situation in some countries, so that the government reports a negative net worth. So in this case, citizens and other users must be helped to interpret what this means and what the implications of this figure are. The increased transparency of full accurate financial reports helps disclose information that is unfavorable and uncomfortable sometimes to politicians, who should be held accountable for the results of their decision using effectively accountability mechanisms. And finally, it's also important to take into account the level of financial literacy of politicians, which affects the way they understand the implications of their own decisions and actions, which will also be reflected in the information, especially in the long-term horizon. So all this must be considered when we define what information must be published or must be externally produced for external users in order to increase transparency. And now I'm going to leave the floor to Sandra Cohen, who is going to explain the last 2 points of the paper. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Isabel. Good afternoon from my part as well. I'm Sandra Cohen, and I'm a professor of accounting in Athens University of Economics and Business in Greece. So let's go now to the enabling conditions for accrual accounting implementation. Next slide, please. Literature and empirical cases reveal that the implementation of accrual accounting in the public sector relies on a set of parameters. When these parameters facilitate implementation, they are usually described positively as enablers or facilitators of the process. These facilitators are the necessary building blocks for the successful implementation of the accounting reform, and they must exist in a sufficient quantity and for the necessary time span, as reforms are a long-term undertaking. The enablers can be grouped under 3 intertwined pillars: goal setting and processes, human capital, and technical. Each pillar is further analyzed into identifiable components. Each of them plays its role in the successful implementation of accrual accounting. Next slide, please. Moreover, there are interactions among the enablers of successful accrual accounting implementation. The 3 elements belonging to goal setting and processes, that is the political support and ownership, the implementation plan, and the accrual accounting information integration in decision making, are intertwined with each other, and no implementation plan can be successful without the appropriate human capital in terms of knowledge and ability of both member staff and experts, and the availability of appropriate tools, such as IT financial management systems, a suitable chart of accounts, and a set of comprehensive accounting standards and policies for implementing them. Next slide, please. Based on the interviews with our experts during the project, some common ground regarding the basic enablers was reached. Political support, especially from the Ministry of Finance, that secures human resources and other necessary resources for the reform, is a prerequisite for an accounting reform to be successful. The significance of accrual data becomes evident when it becomes useful and pertains in decision making. This includes the introduction of rules and incentives to work with accruals, problems and decision making using accrual data, alignment of performance measures with accruals, embedding accruals in the fiscal rules, accrual-based key performance indicators, and demand for accrual information from supervisory bodies and auditors. I think we have already repeated that several times, that it's very important to use the accrual account information during decision making and for accountability purposes. Moreover, a dedicated reform team with skills and vision is absolutely necessary. The reform needs very good project management and a clear plan. Human capital is very important in all cases. This touches upon training of existing staff, but also by the recruitment of new public officials. Understaffed accounting departments are unwilling to assume additional responsibilities to those they already perform. The new logic can attract professionals with fresh views who understand modern financial management, costing, and performance management. The support of private sector experts in financial accounting is also another possibility. Last but not least, technical issues relate to IT systems. IT systems are the cornerstone to embed the changes related to accrual accounting implementation process. Accrual accounting reform is also technical, and the importance of technical tools should not be downplayed. IT financial management systems need to be in place. A massive amount of financial information and new registries need to be set up. The IT system should simultaneously produce information for budgeting, accrual accounting and national accounts, reporting purposes, and be able to communicate with other IT systems for information retrieval and data exchange. We need, however, to be pragmatic and to acknowledge that every reform, including the accrual accounting one, demands resources. Thus, the cost of accrual accounting adoption is an issue that needs further attention. Accrual accounting brings benefits, but its implementation cost is important. Costs largely depend on the accounting maturity of the public sector. This is something Dr. Boyle has already mentioned, the availability of IT systems and the size of the government. Next slide, please. The total costs related to accrual accounting reform include non-IT costs that refer to policies, processes, and people, and IT costs. Both non-IT and IT costs could be split in two broad categories. The additional costs to implement accrual accounting and those that refer to the reallocation of resources devoted to other management activities now flowing to accrual accounting. More specifically, the additional costs to implement accrual accounting refer to the cost incurred in order to set up and implement accrual accounting over and above the cost that would take place without it. They relate to personnel training, expert and consulting fees, the cost of new IT financial management systems or the upgrade costs of the existing ones, the hiring of the new personnel, even the cost of communicating the reform to citizens. These costs are closely linked to the accounting maturity reform of the country, the capacity of the existing IT systems, the complexity of the transactions of the entities, and the scope of the reform. However, sometimes the identification of additional costs might be challenging as well. For example, as financial transactions in the public sector become more complicated, civil servants would need to undergo some training, regardless of accrual account implementation. The same holds true for IT systems, which become outdated and need modernization. Apart from the additional costs that we have already discussed, another group of costs exists. These refer to the reallocation of resources. They correspond to resources that would otherwise be either idle or used in other areas of public financial management. They may include expansion of the responsibilities of public sector accountants to include accrual accounting, use of existing IT financial systems, the commitment of resources to develop new laws, accounting standards, policies, guidelines, etc. This cost that refers to the reallocation of resources is highly related to the accounting reform, but it's not easy to identify unless a cost accounting system is in place. This cost may not affect the budget of the public sector entities as well. Therefore, the total cost of accrual accounting reform results from adding up the additional cost and the reallocated resources. However, the sounder management of resources allowed by accrual accounting information is expected to lead to a reduction in the cost incurred to perform public sector activities and deliver services. This unrecorded cost savings should not be neglected in the analysis. Cost savings, we all know that, are difficult to measure and quantify as they are not separately registered in accounting books. Still, they correspond to benefits that shouldn't be ignored. The more accrual accounting information improves decision making, the higher the chance for these savings to become material. The quantification of the net cost of the accrual accounting reform, that is the total cost minus the cost saving, should also be calculated. This net cost is therefore reliant on the actual use of the accrual accounting information for the benefit of public sector administration and management. Next slide, please. In order to keep the cost of the accounting reform under control, the cost should be budgeted both on a yearly basis as well as an overall project basis, and should be monitored and followed up at all stages. The cost of introduction accrual accounting will not be stable throughout time, as investments and operating expenses will vary depending on the stage of the project, as usually investments are made upfront. This is also a difference between the outflow of financial resources and the cost of the project measured through accrual accounting. For example, the financial flow for acquiring new IT financial management systems may happen early, while the depreciation cost of the IT would be split evenly over a given time period. The accrual accounting implementation plan should also include a clear analysis of the necessary resources and costs throughout the process. The origin of the financial resources to finance the accrual accounting project should be clearly identified and carefully planned from the start, as budget constraints can hinder accounting reforms. Last slide, please. The implementation plan should define and assess the necessary resources dealing with human capital and technical tools. It should include milestones for clear outcomes and budgeted deployment of the necessary human capital, technical tools, and financial resources. The implementation plan should be closely followed up and adjusted to changes faced throughout the process, both time-wise and budget-wise. Flexibility is, of course, necessary, as not all challenges can be predicted from the outset. With that, we would like to thank you for your attention, and we would be willing to answer to your questions and discuss your comments. Thank you. Ivona, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this very robust presentation from all of four academics. Now I would like to ask the audience for any questions. You can post your questions directly into the chat, or you can just raise your hand and we will give you opportunity to speak up. But the questions needs to be asked in English for the translation.
Ivona, may I also suggest that we launch the poll now in order to have the feedback from the audience on two topics that we have selected, please? I don't know if Irma could do that in parallel to the posting of questions to the chat.
Yes, okay. Irma, can you set up the questions? Yes, so now we have the poll, and this is a question about what enabler do you consider the most important one, and there are simply 5 options, so not too much, but they are main one. So the first one is IT systems, political support, implementation plan, training, and qualified staff. So please think for a while and make your selection. You can only select the one because it's actually to choose the most important one. So I'm waiting for your answers. And the second question is on the benefit. So which benefit do you consider the most important one? Again, you have a couple of options. So providing credible information, better management of debt and liabilities, better asset management, discharge of financial responsibility. So it's kind of the accountability area, and supporting anti-corruption tools. So again, it's unfortunately you can only select one, which is really the most important. So this was the reason for the poll, just to make sure that we would like to know what is the really most important aspect. So I see that we have 42 participants, but I can only see that only a couple of people voted, like 7. So I would like to encourage you to push the button. There are translation in the poll, so you can read in the main languages.
Ivona, sorry, I'm Eugenio. Can we leave the poll open and go with our with Marios and Dimitrios also, because I see that in the bottom line there is the poll open, so I think the participants can continue to vote for some minutes.
Yes. Okay. So in general, you can actually click on the poll in the menu and open this and vote at any time. And I hope that Irma will keep this open. And for the sake of time, I would like to now ask our panelists for a discussion, for the presentation of the country experience of the main benefits from accrual accounting from Cyprus and Greece. And I would like to welcome Marios Hadjidamianou, who is a senior accountant, the Treasury of the Republic of Cyprus, and Dimitrios Palioras, acting head of Division of Accounting for General Government in the Ministry of Finance at General Accounting Office of Greece. And both of gentlemen are members of EPSA's working group. So they are really working on the implementation of European public sector accounting standards in Europe. So I would like to first ask Marios for 10 minutes of information on the main benefits, and there are 3 main items I would like to ask him is whether were the main benefits from the implementation of accrual accounting in Greece, and this can include planned benefits and actually the real outcome, and what are the main priority benefits which are the really most important in Greece. And the third item is the lessons learned for our PULSAR member countries, with 3 to 5 practical tips how to best achieve expected results on the benefits, considering the risk and the hindrance of such accrual reform. So Mario, the floor is yours. And still the poll is open, so I will look what is the take-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivona. It is also very interesting to listen to the analysis of the previous panelists and speakers of the benefits across accounting practice can bring to the public sector. Talking about the benefits a new accounting method can bring is never easy. I'm sure all the panelists will agree with me. It takes time, a lot of effort and commitment from those who are driving the change to ensure the rest is following. And this is not easy. Whenever I am asked what are the benefits of accrual accounting, I feel that I have to answer a very obvious and rather basic question. It's like answering to a child some basic questions. Why do I need to go to school every day? Or why do I need the maths in my life? But to be honest, there's no correct answer to this. Different people with different cultures and different mindsets will have a different approach to this. But they all come eventually to the same conclusion. Governments need to have a professional methodology. In accounting, we call it a framework to enable themselves and the taxpayers to know what they have financially been achieving in a certain period of time, and what are the challenges, financial challenges they are most likely going to face in the short and long term based on their performance. So in order to do that, governments need to have a comprehensive understanding of their financial situation as it is. We often listen to the politicians explaining their vision for the country, the future, but they need to have the resources, both human and financial. And unless they know what is their current financial situation, they will never be able to make a reliable plan for the future. So we often listen to the governments talking about where they want the economy to be in the next 5 or 10 years. But how can they go there unless they know where they stand now? And this is an answer across accounting can bring along. So across accounting is
I cannot hear Marius. Is it only me or?
No, I had the same suspicion. So it is. It is his connectivity.
What's the situation of the poll?
Can you hear me?
Now, yes. Now, yes.
Sorry about that. I was talking about the benefits of accrual accounting, how governments can assess their future economic cash inflows and cash outflows through accounting, across accounting. And I was trying to say that in Cyprus, we realized that in the last decade, across accounting might have been potentially helped us avoid the deep financial crisis we had in the island in 2013. So we have engaged ourselves to adopt this practice based on the international standards that are called IPSAS to enable ourselves achieving a better accounting framework and reporting. We are still in the process of doing that, not only because we needed to replace our old accounting procedures, but also because we need to develop a new IT system that is due to completed in the next few months. However, as our accounting procedures have already been adjusted in the new accruals methodology, we are already experiencing a few of the benefits. I can present to you a few of them to make you understand what I mean. The first example I can use is school infrastructure. Part of the procedures undertaken to make the transition to accruals accounting was to identify and register and measure the value of all public buildings, including offices, schools, and other public buildings. And the Ministry of Education has been able to scrap the old incomplete registers it used for the school infrastructure and put in place the new one developed under the accrual accounting transition. The new fixed assets register is an electronic one. It includes exact locations, full specifications, year of construction, sizes, even the photos of the assets involved. And the ministry is hoping to use the new register in their everyday management of the school, which includes maintenance needs, better projections of the equipment needed, more efficient use of areas within schools, more efficient allocation of students to different schools that might be even overloaded or underloaded, or better use of the school buildings, especially those in the rural areas that there are few numbers of students, and they can be used as other buildings like museums or local authorities buildings, or even as cultural centers. A second example, practical benefit that we have experienced is that we have been revisiting our government's policies. And this is one of the most useful parts of our reform, I believe. As we needed to apply many of the provisions of the accounting standards we are enforcing, we need to revisit our policies on social benefits and grants. And when we are asking the ministries, what are the social benefits provided to people, they did not have much of a problem to name each and every one of them. However, when we were asking them, what is the social risk associated to each of those benefits, they were actually struggling to identify them. What does this mean? It means that the government was actually paying a lot of money on what we are calling social benefits, but without really understanding what is the problem we are trying to resolve with these benefits. And follow our questions to them, the ministries had to revisit their policies and improve these benefits in order to ensure that they are more targeted to those who are actually in need of these benefits. And my feeling is that this is actually a major benefit of this project to the government, to ensure that all the money spent has a purpose. And a third example I can give you is on grants provided for specific purpose. Under the new accounting policy adopted on grants, if the government provides a grant to an entity or an individual for a specific purpose, we keep these entities or individuals under our receivables in the balance sheet until they fulfill their performance obligation, meaning that they need to verify that they spent the money for the purpose they were provided for. In this way, the government keeps real-time accounting records on whether government's policies are actually implemented through these grants. And if these are not implemented, then the government will be able to ask the money back from those entities or individuals that they failed to fulfill their performance obligations they undertake through the grant they received. Thus, we make sure that there is appropriate and effective way of using public resources, in this case, the grants, in accordance to the government's policies. And these are the only 3 practical examples of the benefits we were experiencing in accrual accounting in Cyprus, amongst many others, I have to say. And I'm happy to explain and give further clarifications in case needed. So, Ivona, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marios, for this excellent example. I like especially this policy on the grounds, requiring actually to evidence, document the purpose. That purpose is reached, then it's actually a grant, not receivable. So this is very perfect idea. And I see that Sandra was raising the hand. Yeah, so in the meantime.
No, sorry
No.
for that.
Okay.
I lowered the hand.
Okay, I see that we have 12 respondents, so I still keep this open, but the highest option was for political support as an enabler for the reform. And which benefit is the most important? It's providing credible financial information, but still better asset management and debt and liabilities management also received a significant share. So now I would like to ask Dimitrios Paliouras to present experience from Greece, which is, I think, very interesting one.
Yes, thank you very much, Ivona. Thank you very much also to PULSAR and, of course, to the team of professors that give us the opportunity to share and communicate some exams and tips from our ongoing accounting reform. Of course, some topics are already covered from our colleagues. So I will concentrate to two, let's say, case studies, and then I'll communicate to you some tips from our ongoing reform. So first, let's say, case study, if I can use this word, that has to do with the benefit from our reform is the following. That has to do with our treasury and actually our real-time accounting records. As you know, Greece since 2010 had a crisis, a debt crisis. And let me describe, let's say, an example to realize how we can, let's say, had not a very heavy consequences of this crisis. So one of the findings, as the reform is underway, is the following. We have the grants from central administration to entities of the public sector, and we recognize these grants as expenses for the central administration. But while the money, when we transfer the money, they remain to bank accounts that control either from central administration or by entities. But in our books, in the central administration books, are recognized as an expense. And why I made this analysis? Because in 2010, if we go back 12 years, when Greece could not borrow from the markets, has to pay a loan of 6 billion nominal value. And of course, when we went, let's say, to our bank accounts to see if we have enough money, we saw in the bank accounts of the central administration that we didn't have enough money to pay this loan. Of course, then we requested for, let's say, to be lent by the IMF and institutions, European institutions, and then we have, let's say, the as you know, the signs of the memorandums. We had, let's say, 3 memorandums. It was later found that due to this wrong practice, that these grants, let's say, transferred to from central administration to the entities, but in this transmission, there were a lot of money, stock of money in bank accounts that controlled by central administration. So we found that in this period of time, we have something above 12 billion of euros. So central administration has, let's say, the control of more than 10 billion of euros to pay this loan. So from this example, we can see that it is not only a pure matter of accrual accounting, but through accrual accounting, we can have, let's say, a benefit in financial procedures and management. Let me communicate another, let's say, example, another case study that has to do with terminology issues, because when we examine, let's say, the accrual accounting in the public sector, we cannot separate it from budget. So, because in budget, we are, let's say, in cash basis, and still we are in cash basis, there were a lot of issues of terminology, because as you also mentioned from our colleagues, from the professors, in budget we have cash, let's say, movements, in or out, cash transactions, but in our case, because we had, let's say, accounting cash basis, we recognize all these transactions as revenues or expenditures. And what was, let's say, what we found is when, let's say, we issued a loan, when the money transferred to the bank accounts, we recognize it as a revenue. So this is something that we had to change it, and it was another thing that we settled with our accounting. So of course, as you already understand, we recognize it as a loan, and then when we pay a loan, it is not an expenditure, but an amortization of this loan. So we had a lot to do, and a lot to do in the future, as you understand. And for our, let's say, colleagues in the member states of PULSAR, we can share with them some tips just to keep it in their minds. First of all, all this, let's say, reform, it is not a 100, let's say, meters raised, but it is a marathon. This is the first one. A second one is do not have only long-term targets, but also short-term targets driving you in the long-term targets. So therefore, a roadmap probably is necessary tool that can help you to fulfill your aims. I told you that one because we have, let's say, technical assistance from DG Reform and from IMF, and as an outcome of this expertise, technical assistance, one of the activity was a roadmap for the country. Another tip is that you have to keep in mind that it is not only accounting, but there is a budget dimension, so they have to let's say, to work together. And of course, if you are, let's say, a member state of Eurozone, there is also the statistical, the fiscal dimension, because as you know, every year we have the primarily, let's say, targets. a final one, let's say, is that if you decide to go to the accrual accounting, you have to have, let's say, very political support to this reform constantly, because otherwise you can face a lot of problems. Here in Greece, fortunately, in the last, let's say, 5 years, we have a very stable political environment. So our political leaderships are supporting our reform. So thank you very much for this. Ivona, the floor is yours. If you have any questions, of course, we can answer.
Thank you, Dimitros, for sharing this experience. So I see that the Greece came through a very interesting period, and trying to understand, actually, even under cash accounting, you have outflow and inflows, but not everything is can be treated as income or expenditures. So I think that accrual accounting is actually helping you with this issue. So it's actually good to it's good solution for many of these similar issues with recognition of revenues and expenditures. And also this idea about setting the long-term goals is important, but also to have short-term, low-hanging fruits, for example. It's also important to keep you to have some early success on the way, on the marathon. We are actually reached the time, but I would like to ask for any questions, answers, for any questions, and so we have opportunity to answer. So this is the last chance for the audience. I do not see any questions, so I would like to ask Armand Vatian, PULSAR Program Manager for and Governance Focal Point for Central Asia to make closing remarks.
Thank you, Ivona. Thank you, dear participants, speakers, panelists, and of course, all the large team that was behind this important publication on the benefits of accrual accounting. As it was discussed today, comprehensive information on financial performance and position of the governments are important, which is not possible under cash-basis accounting. It was also stated that different maturity level, size of government, and availability of IT, they all impact both the costs and benefits of implementation of accrual. Very interesting discussion was about benefits for what and for whom, and how much it costs. So on what part, it was clearly what at least I heard, and we all heard today, it's about accountability and decision-making. It's about service delivery, it's electoral decisions, granting financing, lending, PPPs, as well as monitoring financial and fiscal sustainability. So that what all aspect was also on the how to use more effectively the resources and the funds. From whom it was quite interesting to differentiate between external users and internal users, because we usually quite frequently refer to external users only. In this case, of course, external users are important citizens, NGOs, donors, lenders and creditors, rating agencies, IFIs, international financial institutions, of course, supreme audit institutions and budget controllers. Those are all referred as external users, which are critical. But importantly, there are internal users as well, which are managers, which use this information for better decision-making. It's politicians, internal audits, government bodies, statisticians, and macroeconomics. They all use this information, so both for external and internal purposes. It was quite interesting to learn and discuss, and today it was discussed practical insights. That is, accurate, reliable, and timely and complete information are critical for accountability, improved reporting, better allocation and use of public resources, as well as foreseeing long-term effect, of course, with better information of costs and risk management. It was also discussed today that different benefits are for different users. So different users have different benefits. Another aspect that's very important is transparency, which covered today. It's trade-off between transparency and costs. And it was reiterated many times that we should avoid overloading of information with too much technical details, keeping it more simplified if possible. And another important element which we sometimes just do not put on priority is financial literacy of politicians affect the way they understand and the implications of the reforms. Enablers, of course, it came up as political support, as this current survey online demonstrated, as well as panelists referred to political support, including from the Ministry of Finance as key element, as well as embedding the accounting reform into the PFM reforms. Critical to have reform team with skills and not necessarily within the government. These skills can be outsourced or insourced. Human capital is as a key element, including linkage to the skills. And again, IT systems, IFMIS, which are becoming a critical element for which also impacts the initial costs. It was also discussed that initial costs can be significant, while longer-term outcome in delivering services and in the decision-making, accountability, and performance will significantly cut them down, and we will have the net cost should be considered with major savings. Very good tips which we received from our panelists. This is not a sprint but marathon. At the same time, make short-term targets versus long-term targets so we can convince also politicians. Make a very clear roadmap. And this is not only about accounting again, it's about budget, fiscal dimensions to work together. Trust this workshop, this event, as well as the publication will help our countries, PULSAR countries first of all, and others to advance accrual accounting implementation journey and succeed. Thank you very much for your participation in this very good event. Ivona, back to you.
Thank you. I would like to also inform you that the paper is available on our PULSAR website, and we will also arrange for translation into main languages. And I hope that this paper would just serve you as a source of information and motivation to start the reform, to have some justifications for your politicians, yes, because the politicians are asking questions, why, how much, what is the cost, what are the benefits. So actually it's a good tool to support this effort. Thank you very much, and see you for the next events which are coming on the PULSAR side. Thank you, bye.